Welcome to Unschool, where we undoctrinate you from public school nonsense. All right, today we're doing a long video about DEI, and hopefully we'll be getting rid of it in many institutions across the country. Obviously, the Biden administration is pushing it further. Maybe if Trump gets reelected, he'll get rid of it, but they're trying to bring it back. I can't think of a bigger misnomer than DEI. It's really about ideological conformity while pretending to care about disadvantaged groups. But it really doesn't help anyone, and it never has. The more that colleges have pushed DEI over the past decade, the more they have lost students because in these DEI narratives, in these equity narratives, which is really just socialism rebranded for the 21st century, um, you have to have an oppressor and an oppressed group, and you always have to have an enemy. That's really the unfortunate and scary part about DEI. I mean, these institutions, these socialists that push these things into institutions and education. I mean, that's where these revolutions tend to start, and it's never good when the state takes over this sort of nonsense. Most of the socialist and communist revolutions of the 20th century came out of the education system, and then they influenced institutions after that. And that's what's been happening in America over the past 10 years. But fortunately, we have free speech in this country, and people are fighting back. Many red states are getting rid of DEI. But you have to be aware that it will just be rebranded. We've had some other videos and articles on unschool.substack.com, unschool with a K, discussing the rise of SEL and ESG, but those seem to be losing steam to some extent as well. But they're just going to rebrand it as something else, like restorative justice or some other nonsense. And let's remember, who is the biggest social justice warrior of all time? Well, I would suggest you go read Mein Kampf and read about that. Read that trash called Mein Kampf, where he advocates for social justice on multiple occasions, and it's pretty disgusting. It says here, Andre Jones, a recent college grad, had been job hunting for months until he enrolled in an IT apprenticeship program that led to full certification and a thriving career. George Forrest, an Army veteran, completed a diesel technician apprenticeship program that helped him transition from the military to civilian life. Allison Van Houten switched careers entirely because of an apprenticeship, leaving her job as a speech therapist to become a woodwork manufacturing specialist. That sounds fun. These are just a few of the dozens of apprenticeship success stories touted on the Federal Apprenticeship USA website. Unfortunately, a new proposal by the Biden administration threatens to burden these programs with red tape, extra costs, and more bureaucracy. The Department of Labor, a pretty useless department, if I don't say so myself, quietly released a nearly 800-page proposal to regulate apprenticeships right before Christmas, between the holidays and the busy start to the year. Government loves releasing controversial stuff right around Christmas and the New Year, doesn't it? They do that all the time. So in hopes that people won't pay attention. This proposal went largely overlooked by the public through businesses, trade groups, state agencies, and others have started to sound the alarm. All signs indicate that the admin wants to finalize this rule quickly. Yeah. And some states banded together to outline their concern that the rule would stifle apprenticeship growth in their own states. Yeah. So red states are trying to fight back, but it's difficult to fight the federal government. It should be a good way to connect workers. Unfortunately, it risks relegating apprenticeships to a last resort option for businesses. A lot of businesses, as I said in one of my other videos, are looking to get rid of college degree requirements because colleges are not preparing students for the working world. In fact, in some ways, it's making them worse off. A lot of degrees in the humanities and social sciences seem to be manufacturing mental illness. The proposed rule removes flexibility for businesses that run apprenticeship programs and imposes a one-size-fits-all structure. Today, businesses have three options when evaluating: time-based approach, which requires the apprentice to complete a certain number of hours of training; a competency-based approach, So on, this new rule removes the competency-based approach entirely. Wow, it's kind of like Washington State saying lawyers don't have to pass the bar anymore, you know? Minimum of 2,000 hours of on-the-job training and 144 hours of classroom instruction. This not only increases costs for businesses that can train apprentices in less time, but also demoralizes talented workers who can achieve competency quickly. Second, the rule requires that businesses provide apprentices with the same benefits as full-time employees. Oh boy, a lot of people are not going to be able to get into it then. Really, we need to go back to teenagers being apprentices and less so 25 and 35-year olds. I think less people should spend 6 hours a day in school. You get through the same content in half a day and then go to a job or something else. An apprentice is fundamentally a training program that brings new workers to the same skill level as full-time employees over time. Yeah. Apprenticeships can be a phenomenal way to connect workers with in-demand jobs and fill business workforce needs. They allow workers to get on-the-job experience and training while getting paid instead of spending years in school and foregoing a paycheck. For sure. If the Biden administration gets its way, this progress will grind to a halt. Program costs will be too high for businesses to want to start them. States will pursue other workforce development opportunities with less red tape, and workers will find jobs that do not require them to jump through so many hoops. Yep, but it doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon. This is the bill. President Biden signs executive order advancing diversity, equity, and include. Oh, this is a little bit different. This is more about DIE, and it's horrible ideas, and but they're just in everything. They're going to push DEI, and that's basically identity politics over valuing people by who they are intrinsically, right? DEI is a total rejection of Martin Luther King Jr., which is pretty sad because MLK said, "Let's judge people by the content of their character." DEI says, "Let's judge people by the way they look, their status as a political identity, and that's it." So it's unfortunate that they're pushing this sort of stuff. I think that a lot of it is related. It relates to what James Lindsay says on his website about Gnosticism and this tendency to push these narratives that you can achieve some sort of superior human being if you just achieve the right level of true knowledge, which sounds ridiculous, but so does DEI. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The Gnostics hold themselves out as people who know more about whatever you're into than you do, and they explain their superiority as being liberated from the limitations they, your teachers, pastors, also politicians, are placing upon your knowledge. They don't want you to know these secrets, but we do. That's the Gnostic temptation. That's the critical consciousness that you're supposed to achieve by embracing DEI. And it doesn't really work. So, DEI is a false deity. Why Christianity and corporate Marxism can't mix. Definitely true. But Gnosticism has been around forever. It's always been this thing parasitizing religions like Christianity originally, but it's happened in other religions as well, where they say that you are your own savior, and so on. So this article is a year old, but it does discuss a little bit about DEI and why it's problematic. It's been a rough few months for conservatives, it says, as a lot of these companies go woke, right? Bud Light also lost a lot of money. But, DEI is parasitic in nature, right? You can read Gad Saad's book about the parasitic mind, I believe the book is called. It's pretty good, talking about how these ideologies have parasitized the education system, institutions, and corporations. The best way to understand DEI is a form of cultural Marxism. It's corporate Marxism applied to the personal practices, hiring, training, promotions of companies across America and the world. As with all woke tricks, the name itself is an act of subversion. Taken just on the words alone, who could be opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Right, and that's what people argue. And another thing James Lindsay will talk about is the Mott and Bailey fallacy, right? If you disagree with their solutions, they'll just say, "Oh, you just don't care like we care. You don't care about diversity." It's like, "Oh, of course I care about diversity." "Oh, and then you must support DEI." But that's the sort of trick they play, right? They often use Kafka traps as well. What's a Kafka trap? It's where you take a lot of the time it's where you make a false accusation where it's 25% truth and 75% a lie. So James Lindsay says that the communists tend to marry a truth to a lie in order to push their own narratives, and that's what's happening with DEI. At the center of DEI is the concept of equity, which is a modern way of formulating the Marxist vision of perfectly equal society in which no one class of people has more than the others. Equity is the solution to the Marxist view that all people fit into one of two categories: oppressed and oppressor. Right? I mean, that's that Marxist ideology. All types of critical theory push those narratives: socialism, communism, fascism. All those different denominations are all part of the same religion, and they all believe that the fight between good and evil is sort of us versus them. Whereas, a lot of religions, a lot of more conventional religions argue that the fight between good and evil is within you. You make your own decisions. They think like if you're one of the critically conscious ones, you're a chosen, you're one of the chosen people, one of the critically conscious, and then you can usher in some BS utopia on earth. It says here DEI sacrifices merit on the altar of intersectionality. Intersectionality is defined as the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. And that doesn't work. Obviously, it's not very effective. I'm thankful that Asians are doing quite well in this country and have the highest income level. And I'm a white guy, and but I'm Slavic, and Slav is where the word slave comes from. So how does that fit into their narrative, right? They shouldn't be. We should be going out there telling all the everyone else to not use the word slave anymore or something. No, I don't really care that much. But anyways, it's just I just use it to prove a point. That is the theory. That is what drives DEI. Thus, in practice, intersectionality powered DEI racks and stacks people according to the inevitable overlap of oppressed status. Yeah, it's a pyramid of oppression. Who's at the top, right? But you can't actually create this pyramid. It doesn't make any sense, right? I would think that Slavs should be at the top, given their history. I'm not going to get into that now, but quite a lot of oppression. So is everyone else on planet Earth, though. So the pyramid of oppression narrative just doesn't work. And then once you've done all that, which is here to corporate HR practice. Now hirings and promotions will be determined less on the basis of merit and more on which intersectionality boxes are checked, or where you are in the pyramid of oppression. Doing so works to overcome the oppression inherent in the system, advancing a more equitable society and moving the world closer to a communist utopia. Equity is the goal of all DEI programs, which is to say that DEI programs exist to force captive audiences of people to achieve equitable redistribution of resources, status, and wealth, according to neo-Marxist identity theories like critical race theory. Whatever. Ultimately, such a worldview is fundamentally anti-Christian and irredeemable. The Bible clearly commands us that we are to show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, Lord of glory. Christians are also called to treat all people equally as image bearers of God. That's probably a big part of the reason why the Christian West was the first to end slavery, and still some of the few places to end it completely. But not to enforce equity in the hiring process. Yeah, there's nothing about that in the Bible. Christians are also called to judge fairly based on the facts, based on truth. Consider Proverbs 18:17. The first to present his case seems right, till another comes forward and questions him. And Proverbs 23:23, buy the truth and do not sell it. Also, wisdom and instruction and understanding. DEI programs are rooted in contemporary critical theory, a deeply unbiblical ideology that Christians must reject. The fundamental unbiblical understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion is so ubiquitous that I'm not very comfortable with Christians even using the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right, because it's a Gnostic religion. They're claiming that Jesus is socialist nowadays, which is ridiculous. They would never support the ideology that you should steal from others in order to raise others up. That doesn't make any sense. But let's listen to this quick excerpt from New Discourses, which is James Lindsay's podcast. And we won't watch the whole thing, but I recommend you do that at some point.
The type of the mechanism by which Gnosticism installs itself or persuades people to believe in it. So you will know that I think that Marxism and woke and queer theory and critical race theory and all of these are actually modern and postmodern variants of the ancient Gnostic religions. If you've been following my longer form podcast and some of the bullets, what that means is, in short, that they think that the universe or the world is constructed as a prison for their higher level spirit, that they're trapped within that prison, and that someone or something has arranged the prison to keep them down and doesn't want them to get out. The Gnostic faiths believe that the God in Genesis, for example, is actually a demon that jails people in the material world so that they can't be as gods. And what you are supposed to do is awaken to the true knowledge of how reality really works, that your so called creator is a demon that traps you in a prison of being, so that you can find your way to secret knowledge, gnosis. That's the Gnostic part that you can use to save yourself from the prison of existence. And I think that what happened with people like Hegel and Marx, Rousseau and Kant are also relevant, is that when they created what has become modern leftism or even romanticism, that they framed out the social order as having this character, that the social order itself imprisons you. And so the people who are in charge of the social order, what Marx called the bourgeois class, turn out to be the people who imprison the society. And so what you, or the people in society who can then awaken to this truth, rise up, move history in the direction that it should go through conflict and liberate themselves. And so I think that this whole thing is modern and postmodern Gnosticism, where the spiritual realm was replaced by the social, and that the people who get to decide what's true and false, or right and wrong, or the means of production, or whatever else, are the people who are imprisoning everybody else in their bourgeois value sets. And they enforce that through Rousseau's social contract that prevents us from being truly free as we were born to be, and so on and so forth. But this isn't to talk about Gnosticism, this is to talk about why people get sucked into Gnosticism. What is the Gnostic temptation? What is the temptation of the Garden of Eden, frankly?
It's to feel that you're the savior, that you're the one who can save everyone else for the difficulties of their existence.
Because in Genesis, the serpent whispers to Eve, roughly, that you could be as gods, but God doesn't want you to know that. But I do, so eat the fruit like you're not supposed to and join me. And so there's a certain modality to the temptation of Gnosticism that leads people in. And it's very important to understand this. How does Gnostic wizardry work? How do they, in fact, what it is Gnosticism always sets up a cult. Maybe it's a cult just of you, and I think that's pretty benign. I would, in fact, call that like venial Gnosticism as opposed to mortal Gnosticism. But how do they get people to follow their cult? They don't come in and say, "You're wrong and we're right, follow us." They don't do that. It's much more tempting, and it's much more along the lines of the serpent in Genesis. The serpent in Genesis doesn't come down to tell Eve everything that you've learned is a lie. It says God has not said. In other words, God told you some of the story, but he didn't tell you all of the story. There's more of the story. Would you like to know it? Well, I'll give it to you.
All right, so that's
The
pretty
first thing you have to do, though,
well.
is we've got to get some compromising blackmail on you. Eat the fruit. Then I'll tell you the real story of reality. And we're
Yeah, they're always trying to make you feel guilty, like you did something wrong just because of your existence, so that you'll feel obligated to, admit that you have some problem, and then you're supposed to go out and achieve the critically conscious attitude. But if you really read the anti-racist philosophy, you'll understand that you can't really atone for the sins of your existence. Like if they decide that you're one of the oppressor group, then you're always part of the oppressor group. You can't change that. Then this article here is a biblical evaluation of DEI. Everywhere we turn, we see the words diversity, equity, inclusion. Even major Christian institutions have DEI offices. That's not good. That's not good at all. That's parasitizing the churches. It's very bad for the future of religion. But there's always these Gnostic influences. In the education system, you have Paulo Freire, third most cited source in the social sciences, who ruined the education system in South America first, specifically Brazil in the 20th century. And his intellectual progeny have really been ruining the education system here in the United States for the past couple decades at least. And his Pedagogy of the Oppressed is his famous book that they always cite, where he says a bunch of positive things about Vladimir Lenin and Che Guevara. I mean, that should tell you enough right there. But, Lenin wanted permanent revolution, and he thought that everyone needed to achieve their consciousness as well, because that's what their religion's all about. You got to achieve your consciousness so you can become one of these saviors. And it's just a creepy cult, and they keep trying to take over government. That's why they're so effective, I think, is because they talk so much about empathy, even though they don't really mean it, and then they always go for trying to take over politics, and people just don't pay close enough attention. Before getting into DEI as it relates to scripture, it should be pointed out that DEI is basically nothing more than reapplying Marxism to race and sexuality. Yeah, let's remember the three main types of critical theory are based around race, sexuality, and class. And, that's what people want to talk about all the time. Marxism was all about class. And, critical theory comes from 1930s Germany, which should concern some people, I think. Anyways, even the relatively left wing political site The Hill admits that at least the more stringent DEI ideologies are Marxist in origin. All of them are. A more honest reading looks at DEI as Marxism packaged with infiltration devices to install commissars and take over organizations, governments, and eventually the world. Yeah, the chosen ones. Those are their religious leaders. They want to put into government. And socialist countries always have stuff like this, whether it's the Soviets with czars, the Nazis with concerns, or what. And then obviously you have the red shirts and the red guard and the brown shirts and so on. These little groups that are like the chosen people according to them. They're supposed to tell the rest of us how to live our lives. In either case, Christians should be concerned about anyone trying to baptize Marx into the church. Yeah, that's Marxism is atheism turned towards Gnosticism, essentially. Eliminate all other religions and then usher in your utopian one that argues you can reinvent humanity or something. Diversity. None of the words in the DEI acronym seem scary when first read. Why wouldn't someone want to support diversity, equity, and inclusion? The problem here is not the words themselves, but how they are used. Take diversity as an example. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, diversity means the condition of having or being composed of different elements. Variety, especially the inclusion of people of different races, cultures, etc., in a group or organization. Aside from the Bible, making it clear that there is only one race, this definition is not bad. However, the word is not prescriptive. In other words, the existence of diversity does not explain what diversity does in practice. It is here that the proverbial rubber meets the road. And remember, again, Marxists always marry a truth to a lie. So yes, diversity does sound good, but they're really talking about exclusion of thought, right? And there's no diversity of thought that's allowed in the DEI philosophy. It's only really one thought process allowed. But this article, you might try reading this article. It's kind of interesting. So, and then diversity of what? Why then is there such a push for diversity in the church? Because there has been a clever bait and switch, right? That's the Mott and Bailey. To the people using the word diversity does not mean difference in skin tone. It means a difference in ideas. Often this is viewed in a racial cultural way. For example, Jarvis Williams, a current professor at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, said it in this way. I think often when a certain predominantly white church talks about multi-ethnic church, I think what they mean is they want black and brown faces, but not black and brown voices. They want black and brown people in the seats of the churches, but they don't want to leverage privilege and power with vetted, qualified black and brown people. So one thing I would exhort predominantly white Christian churches and pastors to do in this room, if you're wanting to engage in serious gospel reconciliation, you must not approach the black and brown body from the posture of the person who's going to help those people assimilate with your predominantly white culture. In this mindset, which is not a biblical mindset, where there aren't white, black, brown people, just people because our identity is in Christ, not skin shade, right? And that's what Martin Luther King argued as well. We should evaluate people by the content of their character. People who are black or brown have different ideas and ways of seeing things than white people, and both have their own truth, which isn't right for the other. There are many problems with this view, some of which we will investigate, but this point should not be lost. There are cultural elements and there are doctrinal elements, and some try to blur them. The dividing line is where core Christian doctrine cannot be abandoned. Remember Paul's stern warning in Galatians 1:8. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. For example, the musical instruments used would likely be a cultural element that people could have a preference on, but agree that their brothers and sisters in Christ may enjoy a different style and not be coerced to enjoy someone else's style, all to the glory of God. The lyrics, on the other hand, should have at least some doctrinal elements, and thus all believers should agree on those elements as truth and be in unity. Now, diversity has been hijacked and extrapolated to acceptance of even cultures that are antagonistic to sound biblical doctrine. In this mindset, telling someone of a different culture that something they believe is false, even if it is actually false, would be attempting to exert power over them. This is called cultural relativism, where no culture can be superior and ultimately there is no right or wrong, a clearly anti biblical concept. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Christianity and many other religions push the narrative that there is a definite right and wrong and that we shouldn't mess with that. Whereas Marxism is a religion that just pushes the ideology that it's, us versus them, oppressor versus oppressed. If you're one of the chosen people, if you're one of the critically conscious ones, then you're the one of these saviors or something, one of the saints, and you can't be questioned, which is pretty ridiculous. And then you have a lot of these other, some states are getting on the bandwagon of banning DEI, which is good. The problem is, I don't know if they'll work that well. I mean, some colleges, I'm reading about them getting rid of their DEI people, especially in Texas and Florida. But it doesn't mean the colleges aren't going to just rebrand it anyways. And the colleges that are losing tons of students are probably like, okay, fine. I mean, this is a good way to save some money. You gave us an excuse to get rid of some people as the colleges continue to shrink. It says Alabama's newest divisive concepts legislation signed by Governor Kay Ivey on March 19th takes aim at state-funded DEI programs. Yeah, why should the state be funding any of this? It doesn't make any sense. It's religious. Should be a violation of the First Amendment. State agencies, colleges, and school systems will have to access current diversity and inclusion projects. The law becomes effective October 1st. But while legislators' stated aim is simple, no indoctrination of certain beliefs about race, class, or gender or sexuality, the law's impacts are far from clear, experts and advocates say. And some worry it will lead to a chilling effect on college campuses or make underrepresented students and employees feel less welcome in Alabama. It shouldn't. People should have felt uncomfortable with the DEI classes. I mean, a lot of them were quite ridiculous, and they often advocate for segregation of students, which is a terrible idea. They don't need to bring that back. It is up to individual state agencies, local boards of education, and college admin to decide how to discipline employees who violate the law. There is no civil or criminal penalty for noncompliance, but the legislature can withhold funds from institutions that continue to maintain diversity offices, according to the state legislative agency. The legislature does not play a role in the implementation of laws. That is the function of the executive branch, LSA Director Othni Lathram told AL.com. That said, the legislature does exercise oversight and the power of appropriation. All state funds provided to institutions of higher education must be appropriated by the legislature, and the extent to which those institutions follow the law is irrelevant to the process. Okay. What will colleges do? Oh, they're going to get rid of DEI, right? Unless they try to rebrand it, which could be quite possible. I mean, they're trying to rebrand ESG in a lot of these large companies as well. And but they're just continuing to try to push identity politics instead of teaching students, which is why males keep leaving college and why women will probably be next and start leaving in the next decade. I am confident that the colleges and universities can adhere to the law in a way that will not diminish the campuses as places where many perspectives on the world and our society can be discussed and considered. Well, that was DEI caused that to be worse. It caused people to stop speaking their minds, and it ruined open conversation on campus. So that's a big part of the problem. And NBC also has this article here. They're not as happy about states passing anti-DEI bills. It's also very weird that the left is so in favor of DEI, given that it hasn't even existed for very long. They just kind of assume that because it's new, it must be better, but it isn't. But anyway, Republican lawmakers have introduced hundreds of bills this session to quell diversity and inclusion programs at colleges, industries, and the government. This essay is going to be bad since they didn't use the serial or Oxford comma there. Where's your comma after industries? Come on. Don't give me that crap. Republican lawmakers in more than 30 states have introduced or passed more than 100 bills. See, that sounds good to me. I don't think that sounds good to NBC or especially MSNBC. They wouldn't like it. But I think it's a good thing that we're getting rid of some of the stuff. So, in the months since the Supreme Court restricted race conscious college admissions. Wow. It's an interesting way to phrase that. They're talking about critical consciousness, which again is not empathy. It's basing your view of people on their political identity as opposed to who they are intrinsically as a person. And I think that's unfortunate. And of course, NBC thinks this is a bad thing, that states such as Florida, Texas, and Utah are among the handful whose legislatures have approved bans on DEI efforts in higher education and public offices. In Florida, the Board of Education recently announced a new rule banning public colleges from using state and federal funds on DEI initiatives. Heck yeah. Hopefully, it'll keep going. Last summer, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a law to require all state funded colleges and universities to close their DEI offices. Yeah, good. And a Utah bill now headed to Governor Spencer Cox's desk would ban all garbage government and universities from having offices dedicated to promoting DEI, not diversity. See, that's they're trying to fake you out there and make you think that they're not supporting it. Advocates for anti-DEI movement have called such policies and programs unconstitutional. Yeah, definitely true. Holding that focusing on diversity and inclusion only divides Americans and fosters white guilt. Well, yeah, I mean, they're bringing back segregation in some colleges, right? Evergreen was doing that, having days where white people weren't allowed to come to school at all. That's what got. And then Brett Weinstein decided to go to work anyways, and that's what got him fired and kicked out. These efforts are part of the larger conservative push against wokeness. The anti-DE efforts follow and have gained momentum from the backlash to Black Lives Matter and the implementation of laws to limit what can be taught about race in schools. Yeah, well, I mean, Patrice Cullors and Alicia Garza were explicit Marxists that made millions of dollars off that stuff. So it's not really surprising. So it says here, we don't want public money going to political activism promoting DEI. Right, because that's what they're pushing in the education system now is political activism and not teaching people how to read, write, or do arithmetic. Right? All those things are declining in the public schools. Public school students are way behind because they push ideology as opposed to anything else, and students are just not interested in learning from them. So that's unfortunate. And then the alt leftist Axios has another article here talking about anti-DEI bills targeting colleges. They say that like it's a bad thing. It's surged since 2021. Yeah, good. Why it matters. The wave of anti-DEI bills in state legislatures have come amid an ongoing conservative backlash against initiatives aimed at fighting systemic racism. No, they're against pushing identity politics in the education system. They're against people pushing this weird pseudo Gnostic religion on people. Right? That shouldn't be allowed. It's a very very odd religion, and they keep trying to mention George Floyd, but that's has almost nothing to do with this topic at all. Like really nothing. That led schools, governments, corporations, and others to create diversity initiatives that typically focus on racial sensitivity and the nation's history of overlooking many of the stories of non-white Americans. I don't remember that part. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. You could argue to your blue in the face about stuff that wasn't taught to you in school. Everyone's got a topic that they're unhappy about about for something that they weren't taught in school. There's limited amounts of time. So I don't know. Maybe we should spend less time in K through 12 education and start pushing people towards apprenticeships, back into the working world and so on. DEI programs undermine traditional teachings of American history. That's true, and often had the effect of making white students feel guilty. I think everyone feels bad after DEI training. Nobody feels good, really, except for the person getting paid, oftentimes six figures in public schools, or the people that are paid to come in and give lectures. They make huge amounts of money. Those people probably feel great, but everyone else feels pretty guilty, and it's just a big waste of time. So 9 states have passed legislation to limit DEI programs or divisive concepts. And, that's just going to continue to increase. These laws include bans on funding for campus activities or offices that promote diversity, right? But again, it's not really diversity at all. That's a misnomer. Totally not actual diversity of thought or of people. Really, it's actually the opposite of diversity. They only push one particular political view, and that's it. That's only one is allowed. So yeah, I don't know. Axios is kind of a waste of time. Says here, some college administrators and boards may not wait for state laws to eradicate DEI programs in schools and could defund them under pressure. Good, I hope so. Gen Z, which includes most of today's college students, are the most racial and ethnically diverse generations in the nation's history. Cool. But people of color are still underrepresented. Everyone's leaving college, though. Men are wildly underrepresented, you could say, but like, should they go back? I'm not sure that they should. A lesson in DEI failure from Britain: diversity, equity, inclusion costs billions and doesn't work. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Memo to companies: go ahead and cancel your DEI programs. That's more or less the message of a recent report commissioned by the UK government, finding that DEI in the workplace isn't all it's cracked up to be. Yeah, it doesn't work at all. Increases animosity, unfortunately. It intentionally tries to pit people against each other in that oppressor versus oppressed narrative. And they try to shut down anyone who's not part of the oppressed group that tries to voice their concern or things they've suffered from in the past. And those things are they're basically told that those things don't count. They get shut down. I don't know if you those of you listening have attended these types of training, but if you try to comment on that way, the DEI practitioners will try to shut you down and stop you from talking. By an independent panel found there's little evidence DEI efforts such as mandatory anti-bias training and corporate policy overhauls have any positive effect on corporate culture. Well, a big part of the reason is because the people coming in to teach anti-bias training have a huge amount of biases. The number one being that the people that they're teaching are the ones that have all the biases. So they come in with a negative perspective, and they look down, I think, on the people that they're trying to teach. Causality between interventions and outcomes is often near impossible to discern, even if positive correlations should be taken seriously. The authors write, definitive claims of what works can be misleading or inconclusive. Results in one context cannot necessarily be replicated in another, as workplaces are complex social environments with countless variables. And unfortunately, last time I read this article, I could see the rest of it, but now I can't. So we'll have to skip that. Here's another one about Washington passing bill to protect libraries as other states target them because they're going after that other type of critical theory, that other type of DEI that involves sexuality. And again, these news articles completely misrepresent the issues. The right does not want books like Genderqueer to be put into libraries. They're not canceling anything that's all that bad. I mean, the left not too long ago was trying to cancel Dr. Seuss and and stop kids from reading Dr. Seuss. So I thought that was pretty ridiculous. They make it sound like it's a matter of representation in political issues, when in reality it's a matter of books showing really inappropriate behavior that people don't want their kids to see. So this one, after pressure, this library moved some stuff from the elementary school to teenagers, and which made a little bit more sense. But it's still pretty controversial. Some of these books, and they don't show them, and I'm not going to show them on this video either. But if you look them up online, some of the books that the right wing has said they don't want shown to children are really inappropriate, like stuff you'd see on the Hub, not in a children's library. Newport Beach's library board voted to move a controversial book from the children's section to the teen section of all city libraries in an April 15th meeting. Concerned about several books with sexual content in the kids section, several residents and parents began requesting the board move the books last summer. And of course they should. Why is there a question? There should be no question. Called Inappropriate Books last year after a young found a book that discuss. It's not just discussing that issue, right? It says they always present it that way. Oh, it only discussed that issue. It shows acts people engage in. That's why they want those books to not be shown to kids, and so on and so forth. So that's what a lot of it. That's what a lot of them do, and and some of the books are pretty inappropriate for kids. Unfortunately, they don't have the names of the other ones here. But yeah, a few books they've gotten rid of a few of them. Yeah, but argue the objection was not about LGBT content, but about kids accessing vulgar content. Yeah, that is the main issue, and it's often misrepresented in the media. So at least this article mentioned that particular issue. And here we have some great news about Texas University getting rid of its DEI offices, laying off employees, returning to the meritocracy. I had said more on a couple of these articles, but apparently the mic turned off, so we didn't get all of it. But the basic idea is there's no more evaluating purely based on their political identity. And it says down here, he added that universities are expected to facilitate a merit-based environment, which is good. And the state is going to be asking them to make sure that they're not engaging in DEI practices. Affirmative action is obviously also not allowed anymore. So a lot of these policies are going out the window, which seems to be a good thing. Might as well start hiring people based on meritocracy. This article talks about how McKinsey studies were a total failure, how military recruitment is way down. People just don't want to apply anymore. And there's no profitability in DEI. It's nonsense. I can tell you what happened with ESG was people were buying companies based on whether they see ESG as like an advertising gimmick. They buy the stock goes up because of that, but it wasn't truly because of increased revenues or profitability in an organization. It was just political pandering, and those tend not to last very long. It's very fickle and it's kind of nonsensical. So those things just weren't going to last, and they didn't. So studies proved that DEI, the original studies were kind of nonsense. They're trying to prove what they wanted to believe in the first place. And it says here McKinsey studies neither conceptually in terms of the correct definition of causality nor empirically in terms of their set of large U.S. public firms support the argument that large U.S. public firms can expect on average to deliver improved financial performance if they increase the racial ethnic diversity of their executives. Okay, so yeah, it just doesn't work. DEI is ineffective. It really should be that simple. It doesn't promote diversity of thought. If you're a large organization, what you want is good ideas. And then we have this one from Harvard. They saw a huge, huge dip in the number of people applying. Military, Ivy League schools, a lot of these institutions are getting destroyed by Marxist nonsense. And a lot of people are in total denial about it. They just think the people who are refusing to go are mean or something. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's not about empathy, it's about meritocracy. It's about evaluating people by the content of their character. And why would you want to go to Harvard if you got plagiarists like this lady uh, rising to the top? You worked your butt off to get into Harvard, and why should people who didn't work their butt off get the top positions? So it's just a joke now. I mean, you're going to apply to jobs in after you finish your degree with Harvard or Yale on there when they're completely politically indoctrinated. I mean, if you look at the student to administrator ratio at Yale, it's 1-to-1. And those administrators have nothing to do but push politics. So, and there's no use to DEI. It's just not helpful. No purpose in doing it at all. But yeah, 17% decline from the year before, due to the anti-Semitism, due to the plagiarism. It's not okay. Anti-Semitism and socialism, unfortunately, go hand in hand, and we need to protect those people. We in America, and not engage in these socialist revolutions that do have a tendency to start in the education system. So Harvard law students resigned from student government over secret ballot anti-Israel vote. So again, this is a big problem that they're supporting these things. I mean, the attack on Israel killed more than 1,000 people. I don't know why more people aren't talking about that. It's like went out the window pretty quick. The Hamas went and attacked a bunch of innocent kids who were listening to music. So it's not good at all that they're pushing that kind of stuff. And this says activist professors at Columbia and Barnard are botching free speech. there just isn't free speech on college campuses these days. And a big part of that is because of the support of DEI. You're not allowed to voice your opinion. And, a lot of comedians won't go to college campuses anymore because they just will get criticized for making jokes. So why would you want to go? And then the students that scream about racism the most tend to be the ones that are actually racist. The college professors that scream about anti-racism tend to be the racists themselves. And those studies, again, that show DEI programs boost corporate earnings, like the McKinsey thing, it's not true. Some such as Elon Musk argue that DEI, which definitionally speaking means addressing structural inequalities in society, constitutes blatant racism. And he says that because that's exactly what it does. Others contend that DEI is simply about creating more equitable and harmonious workplaces. Well, that's because they believe that they can somehow reinvent humanity to be more empathetic, and it's really not the case. And offers clear financial benefits to companies as well. Study after study has proved that diverse companies perform better than their more homogenous counterparts. Inc. reported in 2023 companies that don't foster an inclusive environment or prioritize diversity initiatives do so at their own peril. Proved is a heavy and inaccurate word here, but Inc. isn't wrong. Well, I mean, if you've picked up an Inc. magazine lately, it's mainly advertisements. A lot of magazines are. Inc. and Entrepreneur used to be good, but now they're like at least 50% ads. Isn't wrong about the abundance of evidence showing that DEI initiatives make companies more profitable. From 2015 to 23, McKinsey and Company, a multinational strategy and management consulting firm, released 4 separate studies showing that DEI initiatives boost corporate earnings. Unfortunately for DEI advocates, the research appears to be bunk. Of course it is. A new study published in Econ Journal, a semi-annual peer-reviewed academic journal, shows that researchers were unable to replicate the results. Of course not. So much from the humanities and social sciences they can never replicate. It's just made up nonsense, and it doesn't work. Fortunately, we do have more and more people calling out DEI. The Dr. Phils, the Mike Rowes of the world, saying, hey, equity is a problem. This country was built on hard work, he says. Heck yeah. We cooperate in order to compete against each other. And that competition breeds higher levels of efficiency, and people create newer and more innovative things. That's a huge thing that's made this country great, and is a big part of the reason why the United States has invented so much. He says this country was built on hard work, talent, added value, merit. That you do something merits. Dr. Phil said before the audience burst out in applause. We got too many people pushing for a quality of outcome independent of input. Well, I mean, that basically sums up government, right? They may do some work, although it's not very hard work most of the time. And then they don't have to worry about results because they don't have to deal with customers. They just keep doing nonsense and wasting everyone's time and money. So, again, he speaks out again about it. Mike Rowe slams here woke graduation ceremonies, which are also a result of DEI. Well, I don't think we should be segregating graduation ceremonies. That's a return to the 50s or earlier. It's just not a good idea. I'm not going to read all this because this site has way too many ads. And then you have Washington State pushing digital equity. They got nearly $16 million from the federal government. The government should not be able to push equity. It's unconstitutional. It's against the Bill of Rights. Equity is part of that Marxist religion. I don't know how to solve that problem, though. Do we declare Marxism a religion officially so that we can cancel all that crap in our institutions? Maybe that's the solution. I can't say for sure, though. Washington's share of $2.75 billion in federal funding will unlock opportunities to connect communities and blah, blah, blah. If they call it equity, it shouldn't happen. It's just completely inappropriate for the government to be pushing that kind of nonsense. It says here, Maryland city equity official says she wants U.S. to burn to the ground. My ideology can rise from the ashes. My goodness, that's frightening. But that's typical communist speak, right? They are Gnostics. They believe that liberal institutions were created to oppress us. They need to be destroyed. They believe that religion and culture were created to oppress us and they need to be destroyed. So that's a serious problem. The equity officer tasked with eliminating racism in College Park called to burn it all down, but also says, I don't want to work. Well, that sounds like your typical communist. Man, you couldn't define a communist more accurately than saying that they just don't want to work, right? Marx never had a real job. He was a spoiled brat, then married into the aristocracy and lived off his parents for a number of years and then lived off Friedrich Engels. And Marxism is the religion of the lazy, right? Of the lazy narcissist. So she supports a lot of, ridiculous ideologies like equity, believes everything is suffering from systemic racism. I don't happen to agree with that because it's not true. There's no proof. Ms. Carter does not oversee an entire team. Ms. Carter does not supervise city staff. Her work primarily has been with the city's Restorative Justice Commission. And that is, restorative justice is another nonsense phrase that you should be on the lookout for. Again, it's related to DEI and ESG and the social justice types, the disgusting social justice nonsense. That's what they're pushing. The idea that criminals are not really criminals, that people who engage in thought crimes are criminals. I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn that said something about knives. I'm not going to remember the exact quote, but it was basically about if a criminal is caught with a knife, that's to be expected. But if you are caught with a knife, then you will be the one who goes to a gulag, right? Because you engage in a type of thought crime. And you were supposed to not do that sort of thing. But it's all a little ridiculous. It's all a little nonsensical. So it's unfortunate that they push this kind of stuff in the education system and that we all pay for it as taxpayers. So here's the last article we're going to cover on this video. The 30-year Naval Academy teacher details depths of DEI rot in America's military institutions. And this is why less and less people are joining, unfortunately, because these guys, are great. The military guys are great, but the DEI nonsense is not so much. The Naval Academy tries to square the circle by both bragging about its standards and letting in half the class to lower standards. It's no secret that the Biden administration has reimagined the U.S. military into a left-wing social experiment, from employing enlisted drag queens to boost recruitment. Why would any rational person think that would boost recruitment? To using taxpayer funds to host LGBT pride events on military installations, America's supreme fighting forces prioritize promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, racism over addressing the biggest challenges hampering U.S. military readiness. A recent released book unveils how this leftist ideology is also infecting the military service academies. In Saving Our Service, My Battle with and for the U.S. Naval Academy to Make Thinking Officers. Right? And let's remember, losers like General Milley were pushing all kinds of woke trash, all kinds of DEI nonsense. And he's supposed to be the leader. I mean, if you're in the military and you see that guy advocating for Marxism and so on, then why would you want to stay? You'd obviously want to go. So, served for a time on the USNA Admissions Board, which evaluates applicants and decides which are ultimately admitted into the school. While on the board, he allegedly discovered that, like many civilian colleges, the academy considers applicants' race throughout the admissions process and accepts non-white applicants who don't meet the school's academic requirements. Fleming claims that applicants who self-identified as a member of a race that the academy wished to privilege were briefed separately to the committee, not by a white member, but by a minority Navy lieutenant. Wow. I mean, they're bringing back segregation. They're bringing back segregation. Come on. That should not be happening. And it's disappointing for minorities. Like, African Americans fought hard to be accepted in the military in the 19th century, all the way up through at least World War II, where you had the true Black Panther tank battalion that fought, in a number of important battles like Battle of the Bulge and so on. The choices are simple. If you want students to look a certain way but tend to score lower than others, you accept the lower scores and stop talking about your standards, or you go with the class that can meet these standards and stop talking about the way they look. The Naval Academy tries to square the circle by both bragging about its standards and letting in half the class to lower standards. Yeah. Obviously, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that the use of race based admissions or affirmative action by institutions of higher education is unconstitutional. Unconstitutional, yet we still had it for like 50 years, right? It's pretty ridiculous. Didn't work very well. What I saw at Annapolis was the non racist white midshipmen become resentful at realizing that leadership positions were awarded to less competent midshipmen on the basis of skin color, and that they themselves, if they noted this out loud, were punished for not being with the program, which increased their resentment. Imagine getting punished for being annoyed that you couldn't get a promotion. All promotions or preferences are individual ones, and broadly reflected diversity is brought at the individual level by preferring a less competent individual with the desired skin color. If they are equally competent or more competent, the problem disappears. The military shows us all the problems of any top down totalitarian state, and its members can be court martialed for resisting. Wow. So that's unfortunate. But on the upside, I think there's a turn taking place in American society where people are beginning to speak out. The right wing is speaking out against DEI, and hopefully liberals will be next as they grow tired of what's happening on college campuses and other institutions. Thanks for listening.